I've always had ghosts with me from an early age. They're always around.
Welcome everyone to this week's episode of Are You There, Ghost? It's me, Chiwan. I'm your host, Chiwan Choi, sitting here in Pittsburgh. And today I'm so excited to talk to an incredible poet and teacher, um, just an awesome dude. His name, if we're being fancy today, is André Hoilette. But if we're not being fancy, it's André Hoilette. Andre is a Jamaican-born poet living in Denver, Colorado. He's a Cave Canem alumnus and the former editor of Ambulant, a journal of poetry and art, and former assistant editor of Nexus Magazine. He got his MFA in fiction and poetry from Regis University's Mile High MFA program, 2020 Pushcart Prize nominee. He's had a bunch of work published in Roll Call, Stand Our Ground, Bum Rush the Page, a Def Poetry Jam, and Cave Canem 10-year reader, and journals, Inverted Syntax, Cultural Weekly, Rigorous, Milk Magazine, Nexus Magazine. And he's just one of my favorite people to chat with online. And also, I'm such a huge fan of his work. Please welcome Andre.
Thanks for the beautiful intro. It's very nice.
How are you? I'm
good. I'm good. Yeah.
So today's like 90 degrees over there?
It's a little cooler than 90. It's been 90 for like all summer, which is weird for Denver, but like, we just had a cooling off, but like Sunday and the rest of the week is supposed to be back in the 90s, so it's just one little reprieve.
It's just so hard for me to picture, like, when I think Denver heat,
Yeah. It's hard for me too, and I live here. It's like, why is this happening?
How long you been there?
I've been in Denver for 15 years. I came in 2005. Yeah.
Okay.
It's been a minute.
Yeah. How'd you end up in Denver? It's one of those cities where, unless you were born there, I always go, how'd you end up in Denver?
Right. The plan originally was to move to San Diego, right? And I packed up all my stuff because I had this moment. I bought a house in Ohio. My job was going great. And I had this moment, like I kept waking up in the middle of the night over the winter thinking, I don't want to die here. Like, this is not the right place for me. Like, this is some gloomy, depressing shit. So I was like, I can't stay here. So I gave notice at work, packed my stuff up, house is on the market, and I was on the way to San Diego because I've always loved San Diego. My friend called, to keep me company on the phone, and he's like, why don't you come to Colorado? And I was like, why would I do that? And he was like, you've been here 5 years in a row for vacation. I was like, okay, you're right. And so first he offered, he's like, just put your stuff in my garage, and if you still want to go to San Diego, you're halfway there. And so I was like, okay, that sounds like good logic. And so that's how I ended up here. I ended up sticking around. Yeah.
So did you thank your friend, murder your friend? What happened?
Yeah. We're still in the thanking portion. Like, it's still, still going.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Oh man, I like your shirt. Is that a Basquiat?
Yeah, Basquiat of Muhammad.
Yeah. Man. What part of Ohio were you in again?
Dayton, Ohio.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm terrible at geography, first of all, and like directions, but I'm always confused when people remind me how close Ohio is to Pittsburgh.
Well,
I'm like, what?
Yeah, about 3 hours. So I turn around and drive straight across because it's on the southern end, and you cut through a little piece of West Virginia, and then you're in Pittsburgh.
Yeah. When did you leave Jamaica?
I left Jamaica in the early 80s. I was like 8.5, almost 9.
Okay.
My grandparents moved to New York in the 60s, and so my parents just sort of thought, it's the same thing. Every immigrant story, right? They think that there's better opportunity, and they think there's going to be better schooling, so we should do that to have this opportune thing for our children. And
Yeah.
my sister is younger than I am, so she was probably about 5 or 6 at the
Mm-hmm.
time. And so we moved, and at first we went to New York City, and it was too much because in Jamaica we lived in the country. We lived in, island country, so it's really slow. And then you're in New York City, so we didn't quite adapt. And so my parents chose Ohio because they had a friend that lived in Ohio, and they're like, "Oh, it's more calm. It's really nothing's going on. I mean, it's too calm."
You're like, yeah, it's more calm.
Yeah, it's more calm, like a graveyard, calm, and not very diverse. But that's where they decided to make a go of it. And I'm always like interested in the fact that it wasn't really easy at first. It wasn't like the land of opportunity. Like they got there and they struggled. They had accents, and people don't want to hire you. They doubt your education, all the things. So there was a little bit of a struggle. And then, my grandmother's Catholic, or was Catholic. And so I was enrolled in Catholic school, and that was even more homogeneous. And so it was like, just having a hard time sticking out like a sore thumb everywhere.
Oh man, yeah. When my family moved to Paraguay in South America when I was a kid, and then all the schools were just like Catholic schools.
Yeah.
And we're not Catholic, so I was like, I don't know, they're feeding us these things, these little white things. I'm like,
yeah, yeah. They have a good guilt trip on that too, because like, if you haven't been to confession, you shouldn't take the wafer. But I was an altar boy for a while, and sometimes you have to eat those wafers, like, so they don't go bad, and you have to drink the rest of the wine. So, I mean, it was a different time, but imagine being like an altar boy, like 12, 13, and drinking wine with a priest. I'm sure that could have gone wrong, like so many ways, but you're back there, like both altar boys, like just chugging wine because it's been converted to the body of Christ. You can't throw it out.
Yeah, man, I'm glad you came through that. Because yeah, that could have gone so many wrong ways.
Yeah, 6 times away.
Man. What are you working on these days? Oh, first of all, congrats! I saw recently that you came in like as a finalist for a contest.
Yeah. Frontier was having a chapbook contest.
Yeah.
It was one of the 10 finalists. Didn't win, but it's a little bit of a weird book, so I get it. It's like,
yeah.
With this, but yeah, I really appreciate that. I've been kind of turned off from like contests and publishing and that kind of thing for a little bit, and
yeah.
It took so long to get back to me. It's from an old submission, and they got back and just like, hey, you're a finalist. We'll let you know what happens in 2 weeks. But it was good.
What do you mean it's a weird book? What's it about?
Well, this one it's a chapbook that is about a flame woman. So in Jamaica, in the Caribbean, all ghosts, demons, imps, all of them are kind of under one banner called a duppy.
A duppy?
Duppy, yeah, like Duppy. So, a flame woman is a duppy, and a flame woman appears in Haiti, appears in Jamaica, appears in other places around the Caribbean and sometimes Louisiana. And it's this being that is usually female.
Mm-hmm.
And and sometimes they attribute it to like an unmarried older woman, like how they used to accuse them of being witches. That's like sort of the patriarchy that's baked into the countries. But traditionally, it's like a banshee. You assign this female gender to it. So Cothilda. Yeah, Cothilda. She's murdered in Haiti. So I start the story there. And so this is a chapbook of poems, but it is laid out like a narrative, like a story.
Oh yeah, I love those. I love.
She's murdered at a time in Haiti when the rise of the Dominican Republic. There was a sort of backlash against Haitians, and a lot of Haitians were being killed or run out of the country. So in her story, that's how first she's murdered and they bury her body under a flame tree, but then she comes back. She's reborn as this flame woman, and she doesn't necessarily understand her circumstance. So when I change point of views in the story, sometimes from her point of view, she doesn't know why some of these things are happening. And then other people that appear in that story are Obia men, and Obia men are like Obia is like a root magic, like voodoo, voodoo is, and it's in the middle. It can be mostly used for good, healing, warding off spirits, dream interpretation, but you can also, hex people. So it depends on the practitioner, like who's doing it. So she comes across a couple of Obia men in her story, who, one of whom, Fitzy, wants to, get rid of her, exorcise her, because she shouldn't be around. She's like a demon. Flame women tend to feed on children. And it's also one of the ways you explain like sudden infant deaths in the past. You believe like a duppy snuffed their life out or something. So that's how the story sort of is built in. And she's, going around feeding on infants and not understanding why, but also having recollections. Parts of her old life keep popping back up in her consciousness as she's sort of, the longer she is a flame woman, the more sort of agency she gains in her own circumstance. And that's probably what I'm going to work out when I make it into a full length.
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
Thanks. Yeah.
Are these stories that you're told as kids?
Well, Clothilda, as a flame woman, the flame woman is known, but it's not like a very popular it's not a very popular story, right? So there's other duppy that are more prevalent. Like one is the rolling calf. The rolling calf is what really bad people become when they die. And it's this half cow goat thing with smoldering eyes. And if you see the rolling calf, well, that's it for you, right? So what usually happens though is a few seconds before you see the rolling calf, you'll hear the chain. If you hear the chain, that's your cue to get going. So if you're walking home on country roads in in upcountry Jamaica and you hear that chain, you just better hoof it. And don't look, just tunnel vision. So I've heard about the rolling calf, but I was reminded about flame women by reading a story from Nalo Hopkinson. It was in Dark Matter. I think it was in the first Dark Matter, which was a collection of like Black horror and sci-fi. At the time, they weren't calling everything speculative yet, but it's across and Sherry Renee Thomas was the editor and is a great editor, and she's a great sci-fi and speculative writer herself. But she edited 2 volumes of Dark Matter. And so when I read that, I was reminded of that. And it just kind of stuck around because, I've always had ghosts with me from an early age. They're always around. They're always and they're always in my poems, and they're always showing up in life. And so, that it stuck with me because it's like, okay, that's one of the ones I should know. And then, something just sort of possessed me to sort of start writing that story out about how she became a flame woman and what her life is like as a flame woman or her afterlife. And I don't know, it was just sort of crazy. I didn't have a plan for it, but the pieces just all started to like when you're when you're channeling the story or whatever.
So since you were a little kid, you had ghosts around you all the time in your house or other places you went?
Yeah, it's the first time it happened. So, upcountry Jamaica, right? Your relatives are buried on the land that you own,
Right.
So I was out playing next to this gully, which is pretty much just like the jungle. And there are these 2 slabs that have always been back there, concrete slabs, because in Jamaica, they bury people, then they make a concrete box to put them in, and they put concrete over it, and then a year later they usually tile it, and so it looks pretty. But these weren't tiled; they were just sort of under this guava tree, and I just always played on them because a big flat surface that you could play on, right?
Yeah.
So I saw something, right, and was terrified, and I ran in, and I told my mom first, and we used to have this helper also. And so they were the first witnesses, like, you're terrified, you don't want to go back outside, which is unlike me because I just like to go get lost.
Yeah.
And I saw them in a picture, in an old picture. And I told them that's who I saw. Because when I saw them, these ladies had no legs, but they were wearing like old time dresses, like flowery dresses, but they had no legs, just sort of faded out. And it turns out the two people that are buried back there are the two people that were in the photo. And they are my grandfather's aunts. So I guess they're great great aunts that are buried back there. And so, it's just like that's how it started. And
had your mom seen them before, or?
No, mom's never seen them. I think she sort of believes. My dad doesn't believe at all, and because he doesn't believe at all, nothing ever happens to him either. It's just like, like he's unfazed by any kind of ghost thing happening. Nope, nothing weird happening. It started that way. And after I sort of identified them, it took a long time for me to go back in that area again. But then as I was like sort of growing up, like just things would happen, weird things would happen. It was really a mess, like around the time of college, where I was interacting with them so much that I had to just ask that, like.
So this is in Ohio.
Yeah, this is in Ohio. Yeah. So it started in Jamaican. It's just, obviously it's me. It happens wherever I move, right? When in college, it was sort of like it was happening a lot, and I just had to put it out there, like in the world, like like I don't want to see you guys. I really don't. I don't want to. I don't want to see you. And so I wasn't seeing them, but they were still around all the time. They were still doing things. Things are active. And so, I was just like, well, that's just, I guess, part of this life, And the other thing I could do at that time was that I could tell where they were, like in people's houses, or sometimes.
Oh, so you weren't just experiencing it in your own home. You were seeing it in different places.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Well, I was walking on the street once, and I knew that I shouldn't look up, but that feeling where you look up anyway. And I was walking by some house. I don't know who owns that house, but saw the woman in the window, and I was just like, I shouldn't have looked up, because I also knew she wasn't like a real woman. As I looked there, I was like, oh, I shouldn't have looked up. I should have kept it moving. And then even in Denver, like one of the houses I lived in the longest was haunted as hell. I had to tell people when I was interviewing roommates that the house was haunted. Before you move in, I just want to let you know that we would kind of shirk it.
Yeah.
I had this roommate, Hannah. She moved in, and my friend Tran, who's Vietnamese, we were the roommates there, and so we're telling Hannah, it's great, we'd like to have you, but we should tell you that the house is right. And of course, she didn't believe me, right?
Of course, yeah.
But just by the fact of living there, stuff would start happening to her, just like happened to all of us. And then, these things, where you're like these misses of perception, where you're like, I just saw you though. I saw you in the kitchen, like, no, I'm not home. I'm going to be home, but I'm not home now. Like, oh, who did I see in the kitchen? No one else is home. Like, lots of things like that. Like hearing people walk up, lots of walking. But that house was like 100 years old, man. It's so old.
Yeah. Was it like you mentioned when you first experienced it as a kid, it was like scary and you didn't want to go back there anymore? Did it always stay scary, or did at some point was there a shift to like, this is who I am, this is my life?
Well, it's not so much me. as it is some of the spirits are harmful.
Mm,
You know, some of them carry malice. So
yeah.
so like I would get a different feeling of them, like when
Yeah.
around and what they were.
Yeah.
Uh, and so I would know, like, maybe don't mess with them, or um, like, to tell the people that are in that house to be weary about
Mm,
staying in the house. So those are the only times it was scary, is when I came across something that wasn't quite right, maybe not happy in how it's existing. And
yeah.
those tend to be really willful, like they can exert their will, so they tend to be able to like move things and cause harm, be more scary. But they're having a real conflict about where they are, and sometimes they know that they're past, they know that they're dead, and they just don't care. They don't care to move on. They're like, some resentment is holding them there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess I did still have scary moments, but it depended on where and with whom or with what, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. What was the last scary episode you had?
Oh, so I was visiting Ohio, and there's this barn called the Red Barn, right? It's where a really weird thing happened to the family that lived.
Red Barn doesn't sound too safe, man.
No, no. It doesn't. I mean, I guess they're all kind of red in the country. You're like looking like, oh, big red barn. This one doesn't have a flag on it. But the family who owned the land, um, like, disappeared somehow and left all their belongings there. So for the longest time, the house and the
Yeah.
barn stood, and then eventually no one claimed it, and the county took it over, and it became part of the parks. So there are these three parks that kind of merged: John Bryant, Glen Helen, and so it's on their land. And so they knocked down the house and the foundation, cleared all the belongings and such, but the barn stood, and it just became a place for kids to go hang out and do witchcraft and do drugs. It's like whatever you were doing, you could go to the barn. It was away from adult supervision and whatever. So I went there with my girlfriend at the time. We walked up there, and immediately I was like, I want to avoid the barn because I keep hearing bad things about the barn. So she was like, well, if we take this trail and turn this way, it'll be at our back. We don't have to deal with it. So we're walking, and through the trees, I start seeing the red. And I was like, is that the barn? The fucking barn is right in front of us. Like, I thought we turned, right? So we were walking, and as we got closer to it, there was just like a moment on the trail where that part belonged to the barn and the other part was normal. So we went in, kept going, and I was like, well, now I know a little bit about it. I understand what's going on when these things happen to me. So let's, we can go check it out, like ghost hunter shit, right? So we walked up there, and we went in, and so many things were going on psychically. You know, it was intense. Like, you couldn't move. It was like you were moving through porridge. Like the air in there was thick, and you were like slow motion and everything. And I'm glad I had another person with me, because it was like, it's hard to tell anyone that story and like, you're full of shit, right? I'm like, there's another person. So we were there, sort of wading through, and we're like, this place has some bad energy going on here. And then there were these old horse stalls, and I just had this flash of a memory of people I didn't know, um, someone getting hurt in the horse stall, and like the two guys who did it. And then we were walking under the loft part, and we got there, and I was like, should we go up to the loft, right? And we started to hear like someone walking up there, because the wood is really old, so it's like boots, ding, 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 like up there. So I was like, is somebody up here? We start yelling, is somebody up there? Is somebody up here? No one. And the barn had this weird light coming through the planks, like slicing light, right? So I figured if it was a real person, they would cross one of those. We'd see
Yeah.
No, so nothing, right? Nothing. And it's like, oh, this doesn't feel good. And I wanted to sort of like make sure that I wasn't crazy, like there must be somebody up there like fucking with us. So I went halfway up the ladder just so I could see over the loft floor, and like no one's up there. So I was like, I came back down the ladder. I was like, we gotta go. Like no one's up there. You know. So we turned to leave, and it was even more slow motion, even more thick. It was just, I was like, oh my God, we might never get out of here. So I reached out and I held her hand, and I was like trying to pull her along, and she's, like stuck just like me. And we came outside, and the cicadas just started screaming, like in all the trees, they were just screaming. And I was like, "Oh my God, what is happening?" But we were like released, into this open meadow when we got out of the barn, and it started to have one of those beautiful rains that happen when it's still sunny, you know. So as we were like moving off back to the path, like this rain started, and I was just like, "Yeah, that's the cleansing rain we need," because like whatever just happened there, we almost got caught up, you know.
That's
Uh,
crazy.
yeah, and then so her
Like,
friend.
were you like, who's directing this movie that I'm in right now?
Well, I was concerned because I was like, I definitely wasn't directing this movie. What's going to happen? Like, people like me usually don't fare well in the horror movies. So, I'm like, we should probably get going. She had this friend Betsy that told us though, like she met us at, in the cafeteria at college, and we started to tell her about it, and she's like, oh, I already know. And she's like, you know what? And she pointed to me, and she said, you can't ever go back there. They'll wait forever for you to come back there. And I was like, all right, I'm never going back there. I'll never go back there. And a few years ago, I heard that it burned to the ground. So I was like, I'm still not going back, but
Did,
I'm
like,
glad
it
to know
hurt?
that it burned to the ground.
Like,
Yeah.
it hurt? Do you know?
No one really used the barn. It was just like
Right.
this freestanding structure on the parkland that people just.
Yeah, I thought kids might have been in there,
Oh yeah,
doing the dope.
yeah. They probably started the fire, but like, it, or maybe it was a light.
Man,
I don't know, but it just sort of mysteriously burned down, and people were like, some people were relieved, some people sort of mourned it as a loss because it's been standing there for almost 200 years.
yeah.
Yeah,
That's kind of crazy. Like, have like a physical experience like that.
yeah, yeah. When they're mean like that, there's usually some kind of physical movement of things. You
Yeah.
know, they definitely want to let you know that they're there and it's not your imagination. They definitely want to intimidate. And so whenever I had those, like you said, if they're, have I been scared all the time? No, but when I've come across the ones that are malicious, I'm definitely cautious. Yeah.
Does it take you a while to recover from something like that, or
Yeah, it
what?
depends on how close they get to you, you know.
Hmm.
So like in Jamaica, we have this thing where if a duppy passes through you, it causes this sensation that only can be described as your head swells.
Mm.
Unless you tend to have that experience, it sounds weird, but it's sort of like your perception and your head becomes as big as a room. And
Yeah, I could totally see it. Yeah, I
you
could totally see that. Yeah.
feel it all the way out, right? Um, that takes a little while to recover from. That used to happen to me quite a bit when I had like teenage sleep paralysis and things like that. You get caught up in those moments and you have a sensation that something is happening or something is coming. And, you know, um, but other than that, it's just sort of emotional recovery. I think when I read Arrow of God by Chinua Achebe, it's the only other time that I've heard somebody outside the Caribbean describe having your head swell. In that book, he talks about a ghost passing through somebody and their head swells. So I was like, oh, this must have come from West Africa. This whole notion and sensation that we know of must have come from there because,
Mhm.
who else describes it like that,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah, but it's sort of like, you do feel drained and sick when that happens. And other times it's just sort of emotional, like, I can't believe that happened. Like, or that almost happened to me. Like, so
Yeah.
sometimes you're just like freaked out for a while.
Yeah. Man, I can't get. I'm still like picturing you trying to run out of this barn. That's
Oh, yeah.
it's like freaking me out just thinking
Yeah.
about it.
Like soup. It's like, oh, yeah. It's so strange. One of the
So,
strangest.
yeah, what you say you were there with a friend or your girlfriend at the time, or
Yeah, my girlfriend at the time.
were they someone who also had previous experiences before, or was this a completely new thing to them?
I never talked to her about it before, like if she had experiences with ghosts. I think we talked about it after, but I don't
Uh-huh.
think there were many, um, besides sort of like living. She lived in the Caribbean a little bit during college, like studying
Mm.
a semester out. But other than that, like had a pretty normal American growing up, and I don't think the American culture is as accepting of ghosts. Like if it's around the time of Halloween, everyone's in a ghost. But like,
Yeah.
and other people I've come across, like um, I have Chinese relatives, other Jamaicans, people that I meet that are from other places. It's baked into the experience of living.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's like sort of matter of fact.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. It
yeah,
could
yeah,
be on the stairs. That could
yeah.
be it could be a duppy in your house. And you're just sort of like, yeah. And we just kind of lived with it, and because there's also nowhere else to go. If your house is haunted, not like, oh, we're just gonna sell that house, move to another one. It's like, no, this is where we live. We lived here for generations. We're not gonna be run off by a ghost.
Right. No, that's a common thing. Even watching like ghost shows on TV, it's like we're not gonna let these ghosts chase us out of this house.
Right.
And I'm like, yeah, you should let them chase
You
you out
should, you should pack up.
Yeah, I think you could. I think you should go.
Oh.
When did you first start writing about or incorporating it into your writing?
I think it slipped in when I was a teenager. It just started to show up. Um,
Uh,
and I think it's because like I'm somewhat aware of it a lot, and so it just started to jump into poems, jump into stories, um, and then it's not exclusively what I write about because I'm not
or
necessarily a speculative writer, but even when I'm writing other stuff, it makes its way in. So for me, when I think about it, like especially in writing, is that it adds like a texture to the writing that I think most people are familiar with, whether they want to admit it or not. They're familiar with it. So when you're talking about like a ghost or something or a device that is like a ghost, it just builds the story a little bit more because people have it, but they don't see it. Like it's
yeah,
ethereal. But when you write it down, you're trying to write down an ethereal thing. And I feel like that conflict in it being ethereal, but being written and being physical has some sort of conflict, and that adds texture to what
yeah,
you're.
definitely. I think textures are a great word for it. I
Yeah,
think it's really one of my favorite things about your work is that, like you said, it seeps in on it. It's often just a layer. You're just creating a layer to whatever the thing you're writing about. Like this is the world, this is a universe where this exists, and
yeah,
yeah, and I think it's so effective and moving and all that stuff.
yeah. And it's an intersection point, I think,
Yeah.
while waking, and that those are the people who say, oh, I've had these experiences, but I think also while sleeping, and people who like, well, that might have been just a dream, like some of those really lucid dreams where weird things happen, and it's like, well, it might be the same intersection point,
Yeah.
It's like it's just this is where they meet.
Yeah. Um, Weird question, but did you ever were you ever afraid that these experiences might go away? Like,
No,
like e- even though it's like tiring, scary, whatever it is, sometimes inconvenient. Like for me, I remember when I went through a stretch where like I wasn't seeing those, like I felt this loss.
yeah. So, I mean, that's great that you brought that up. I I wasn't afraid of losing it. It was happening so often that it became like a burden. Like so,
Yeah.
like by the time I was college age, it was happening so much that it was burdensome. And my friends all thought of it like a parlor trick. They'd want me to like do this house, do that house, and tell them where the ghosts are and all that. And so I was like, I didn't really want that. And so, I remember one time I was just like in my thoughts and in my meditation, like, I don't want this anymore. I don't want this, I don't want to be the person that sees them, hears them, anything, right? And I hadn't seen them in years because I said I didn't want to see them, and somehow that's been honored. But I always knew when they were around, so I was like, I don't. And after that, it went away for a while. Like, and then after a couple of years, I kind of missed it. Like, I kind of missed knowing who else has lived in a space, you know, or that the space that is lived in feels a certain way more so than the place that is not lived in by either someone who's dead or alive, right?
Mm.
It feels different. And so I started to miss that feeling, and that I started to miss the knowing, the knowledge part of, like, well, I know something's here, so I don't have to worry about weirdness because something is here, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
it came back. It didn't go away. So even though I asked, it only went away for a little bit, and then it came back.
They're like, what's up?
Yeah.
Sup, Andre?
Yeah, you can hear, so you're gonna hear.
Man, I this book you're working on that you're gonna hopefully expand to a full
Yeah.
length. I can't wait to read it. Yeah, I mean, hopefully you'll shoot me a
Yeah,
draft of it I could look at.
definitely.
But yeah, it's like I've always felt like poets just don't. It's weird because poets are always one way or another writing about death and life and the in between, but
Yeah.
not often enough directly about the dead, the ghosts. And I don't mean in a metaphorical sense, like
Yeah.
actual thing. So
Mhm.
it's always exciting to me when I see people working on things like that.
Yeah. I mean, I have this friend, Krista Franklin, lives in Chicago, wonderful poet. I mean, when we used to live in Ohio together, she basically told me they can't be ignored,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
She's like,
Thanks, Krista.
yeah, open your eyes. You can't be ignored.
Yeah.
It's there. It's around you. So
Yeah.
and yeah. So I think even though it may have gone away, that it must be a part of you or something like that. It must be something ingrained. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Hey, going back to the Red Barn.
Yeah.
How'd you feel when you found out it burned down?
I was happy. I was happy
Mm.
because I was wondering if other people were going into that space and having, maybe if they were sensitive people, they were having maybe an awful time. And for the people who don't hear or see anything, they were just, it's a place to hang out. But, who knows who they brought with them? There's some sensitive person picking up on all that, like, sort of bad energy and malice, and what it's doing to them. And they don't know why it's doing it to them.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know what's happening. So I was sort of glad, because I was like, that's an unfair setup, like, so I post a sign on that bar and say it's haunted, don't go in there. But like, so when it burned down and no one knew how it burned down, I was sort of like, yep, I'm still not going back, because that psychic lady told me don't go back there. So I'm not going back. But I'm glad that it's not standing,
Yeah. Man, one last question before I ask you to read something for us is going back to your very first experience. As a kid, I know in Korea we were told from as long as you can, as far back as you can remember, we're told like folk tales or stories of this spirit or that spirit from a very, very early age.
Mhm.
Was For you, did the experience happen first, or did you already start hearing stories about different folklore and spirits and stuff first?
I think when it first happened to me, I was so young, I hadn't, because I think at that time, I don't even know if I could read yet, you know. So I was really young. I think then, as you get a little bit older, you start to hear things, and of course some things are cultural. People tell you not to look, not to do this at night, not to do this and that, but it's also like a part of, like, keeping children safe by scaring the crap out of them. So some of that is like, I started to hear around that time, like, about Screwface, which is the devil, or like the devil, and all these things that you'd hear about.
Screwface.
Yeah, Screwface. And like, so then you started hearing about other duppies, and where there are duppies, and And I think that's again sort of baked in because like I was going to even ask you guys like, yeah, in Korea you must have had several ghost experiences like growing up because I feel like on islands it's more concentrated, like
Yeah, yeah,
next to
yeah.
the
I
sea,
mean,
I feel like there's a border that ghosts don't cross, and so anything near the sea it's like concentrated.
yeah, yeah, because it's a tiny place, and also whatever massacres there were, whether it's through war, colonization, whatever it is so recent, right? So it's like, there's you hear so many stories from starting out as a kid, but also so many people telling stories of what they're seeing that's not part of like folklore.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
so yeah, my experience started at my first house, when I was like 3 or 4 years old. So it's a trip. It's a trip. But it, like you said, it's like it's a lot of like cultures outside of the US.
Yeah,
The stories are so embedded in our day to day.
yeah. Were you afraid when you had those experiences?
I was afraid at first because I didn't know what it was. But as soon as my dad acknowledged it and saw the same thing, it was like, oh, I'm still scared because I'm a damn kid and everything's scaring me.
Yeah,
But I also understand this is part of a thing in the world.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
And it's not just you. You're not
It's
alone.
not just me. Yeah. I think the aloneness is what I still just, it gets so frightening. Like, what is happening to me and why are they coming after me and things like that.
Right. Yeah.
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 Man. Are there stories in like that are, I'm sure there are a lot of common stories in the Caribbean. We spoke with Amanda Chiwan, who's from Trinidad, Tobago. Like, are there very specific, like, iconic figures from like Jamaica, from Haiti, from
Yeah.
Dominican?
So like rolling calf is one that's like other people know about it in the islands, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and flame woman a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
People know. Um, Screwface will go by different names, but is, around for sure.
Yeah.
Some of those things are, I think, either the experiences are common enough that when you find someone that relates to it, maybe the name travels with the story. Because, I don't know how all these things have the same name and have the same description, especially, these islands are close, but it's not like you're swimming to them, It's
Yeah.
not,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it's like a trek, right? So
Yeah.
how is it that these stories are being shared? Is it part of being a Caribbean islander? Is it because like the African brought to the Caribbean has brought that sort of knowledge with them to spot it? Plus, like when we arrived there, all the Arawak and Taino that lived there died from disease because
Mm.
both Europeans and Africans had sicknesses that they weren't, they've been living on an island, they weren't exposed to, and things wiped them out, and
Yeah.
besides like the Spanish and the French and the English killing them too,
Yeah.
it's like, so I don't know. I think that commonality of being in a place that was at first unconquered and belonging to somebody else, and then you move in with all the strife that's going on with you. It's like moving into a haunted house. You're being haunted by the people that were already there that are
Mm.
not. And now you are there under these sort of weird circumstances. And I feel like it sort of makes those sort of spiritual happenings more pronounced because you're living in somebody else's house.
Yeah. No, it's a great point. That's a great point. Damn. Thank you for these stories, man. um, can you read a couple of things for us?
Yeah, I'll read a couple things from Cothilda just because we've been talking about it.
Yeah.
So I'll read how she comes about. So Cothilda, Origine de Femme Flamme, or Origin of the Flame Woman, Dominican Republic, late 1930s. I was born twice, once in Haiti across the river Jereme. My mama was a washerwoman on the other side of the island. When I was a girl, the autre enfant, would remind me of how she, ma mère, was bad-minded and boasty. No one was in shock when she returned missing teeth, her foot mashed up, for thieving from the mistress's powder box. We moved to Port-au-Prince. The shame was so bad. Maman could wash and press clothes, but the foot kept her from carrying les enfants or standing long. We were, for generations, in the service of our betters. No tichewal. We were horses, ridden by spirits. She made a money as a washerwoman, undoing the hexing stares of jealous women, or the singing back wanton men to their rightful homes, with root oil to be applied to their foreheads while sleeping. When Maman died, I moved to the other side of the island and found a good family to wash for. I lived in the back room off the kitchen. Their children were almost white. My skin was the color of eggplant. The mistress had a long face and is always ill. The mister was a surveyor for the government and gone all the time. There's talk of upset on the radio and among the washerwomen and hands who cut cane. They say we have to go back home to Haiti. But no one stirred really. This was the talk they talked all the time. Monsieur came home late and found me in my room. Clotilda, get dressed. Soldiers are coming. Get dressed. They'll want you to go with them. Say they are taking you back to Haiti. But I've heard that no one who has left has arrived. You know the rumors. For months, we have heard of people going missing at the hands of soldiers, but thought rumor. They must have left their jobs to go back home. He stuffed money in my hands and gave me a loaf of bread and 2 avocados and butter. Find others. Leave tonight. I found out from the field hands that other workers were meeting at the sugar mill. We were going. We cut through the gullies and traveled at night. I met the others. All were talking of what they heard, who was missing, who left. I heard some of the field hands were working for the government to spare their own lives or to stay in the country. They were black like us. Hearing our whisperings made it easier to catch us. We came to a road at the brim of a gully. It was my turn to look before we crossed. The others stayed back in shadow. I was deliberate and slow. I listened, and when I thought it was safe, I began to cross. See one there? Come. When I turned to run, there was another man. They seized me. He ripped off my head tie and pulled me down by my plaits. He knelt on my arms. I called out, but the others remained quiet. Other men came running, cursing me. The soldiers pulled up a jeep to give them more light. One grabbed a big stone and swung it down, knocking my jaw loose. Before I passed out, I saw 3 of the hands running to me, did the soldiers killing for them, their cutlass blades glinting in the light. My feet were the first to go, metal working through bone. By the flame tree, they dug me a muddy sore, an unwilling womb, and I was born again, the color of smoke.
Dang. Dang.
Yeah.
You got one more?
Yeah, I got one more.
Yeah.
I'm gonna stay with I'll stay with Clotilda. And Fitzy, yeah, I think I was telling you before the room before Fitzy's one of the obium men that's in her circle, right? Yeah. The other one is Anel, but Fitzy is righteous and believes he's on the side of God, and he's always looking to catch her and other duppies and sort of exercise them. So, sealing the room, Clothilda, flame woman. She can never exhale. An anxious feeling, like holding your breath while pacing the walls and the ceiling. She posed as a well-wisher after the baby was born, got into the house by wearing the skin of a sour woman from church. The woman would be found dead in a day or two, but until then, Clothilda used the skin suit to travel the sunlight hours. She decided to stay here after she saw the baby. Clothilda has been here every night since, to hear the infant coo and play with her when babies should be sleeping. Clothilda watches the infant breathe, the way her chest rises, baby breath spilling out like a hydrant, sweet and flowing, unlike her still, stale breath. In the nighttime hours, where the minutes hurry, then slow, inhale, then exhale, she tries to hold her, wills her to be her own, unraveling with her in the wind. She can't remember her own baby's face, long dead, whose children are now grandmothers themselves. Fitzy, Obeah. He has seen her in his dreams, knew she was somewhere close in town. He has been preying on it. Fitzy's been sent for in a panic. He stops only to dig a 3-foot deep hole outside by the hibiscus bush. Baby's breathing has stopped. Her eyes fix black marbles loose in their sockets. Fitzy sends the mother outside, draws hard on his cigar, the leaves sticky, blows smoke, closes his eyes to see what is hidden. He finds it in the corner, lapping the infant's face, a shredded lavender specter. She's been eating baby's spirit like thread off a spool. Fitzy calls on those gathers to hold hands and pray. He seals the room. Pungent splashing of Jamaican white rum across the threshold, on the windowsills, and empties the bottles on the perimeter, saying a prayer at each. Take hold of the dragon and the old serpent. He lights frankincense. Cast him into the bottomless in the northern corner, and myrrh in the south, and drinks star oil in the center of the room. He knows what words to say. For extra measure, Fitzy calls on Jesus to loosen Clothilda's grip and cast her out. With each breath, he shrinks her form, shackles her with his commands. He's brought a kid goat into the woman's house, calls them to bring it in, its hooves clattering against the tile. Between the rolling of bones, prayers, and offerings, he casts the weakened flame woman into the goat. Now the baby draws its first strong breath, and again, and again, and begins a good strong wailing until her eyes open. Her mother races into the room to collect her child. Fitzy leads the goat by its rope leash to the garden. Some of the people gather around to watch. I commit you to the ground. I commit you to the ground. With that, he draws a cutlass from its sheath and quiets the bleeding kid goat by slicing its throat. He's careful to let the blood spill only into the grave site and has lined its perimeter with a thick line of sea salt meant to keep spirits from crossing. When drained, he tosses the body into the hole and covers it. With the days and the months, she withers. Clothilda becomes earthbound, tangled in hibiscus roots.
Wow. Thanks so much for those poems and all the stories.
Yeah, it's my pleasure being here.
Yeah, it's been great to finally chat about this.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone for joining. That was André Hoilette with those beautiful literally haunting poems and the wild stories. Love you, man. Hopefully we could chop it up face to face one of these days.
Yeah.
Let's do it somewhere other than Pittsburgh.
Right. Absolutely.
And please send me that chapbook because I gotta read that whole thing after hearing those two pieces.
All right, we'll do.
Is there anything you want to mention, like events or classes or anything you want people to know about?
I'm teaching a lighthouse class right now, an 8-week course, but it's underway already. But in the fall, I'll be teaching another one. So if anyone wants to come hear me run my mouth, they can do that.
LighthouseWriters.org, right?
Yeah.
If you're interested in studying with Andre or other people who teach there, LighthouseWriters.org. He invited me to actually speak to his class one time, and that was really great. Really engaged students. Really talented, engaged students. So thank you again. Thanks everyone for being here. We'll talk to you soon next week. Peace.
My Paranormal Network.